So how is everybody today?
Great.
You know, that song is really great. It reminded me of a line from The Best Exotic Marigold Hotel. You know that movie?
Right, yes, yes.
One of the characters in it says, nothing really has turned out like I thought it would. And the next, I think it was Muriel, says, yeah, but sometimes that's the good stuff.
Yeah, she watches it like almost like every time she goes to the gym, right?
Oh, no, I don't watch that one. I watch other stuff. But there goes that secret. You thought I was just exercising. So good morning and welcome to those here, and also welcome to those online. I'm so glad to have you, whether you're watching now or whether you're watching later. We love to have our online audience as well. If you're watching by Facebook and you want to post a comment, go ahead. We will try to answer you, so that's sometimes fun to do. So I want to spend our time today talking about those moments when we face the reversals and the challenges that are the stuff of life. Okay, it may seem to you that every week I get up here and talk about horrible things happening. Really not so. Next month we're talking about good things. August is a good news month. No, we're going to talk about our series is The Three Faces of God, so I urge you to join us for that. That is a fun series. But today I'd like to talk about how we deal with difficulties and challenges, and I want to give you a bit of a different perspective. I'd like to explore how we can approach our lives so that we can grow and thrive no matter what is in the way. I don't want to talk about weathering it, I want to talk about thriving through it. And the reason that's important is because so much of our life is taken up with challenges. We tend to think that life is going along as normal and then wham, something happens. A lot of our life is just large challenges, small challenges, everyday choices as to how we get through, and that's what I'd like to talk about today. There's a saying which originally comes from Hasidic scholar Rabbi Nachman that the world is a narrow bridge, and the most important thing is not to be afraid. Just sit with that image for a second. The world is a narrow bridge, and the most important thing is not to be afraid. So imagine yourself transiting, you're way high up, and you're transiting a narrow bridge, say it's as high, wide as that, high above the chasm. What happens? We peer over, we lose heart, we freeze, we get stuck, we hope to God somebody's going to come and find us because we just can't move forward. I remember when I was a kid, my father worked in New York City on the 33rd floor of some building. I couldn't go near the window because I was so paralyzed with terror at looking over. Take that image and just imagine that we are walking along this narrow bridge. It is a great metaphor for our lives. We are always walking on that narrow bridge. We are always walking on it suspended high over nothing. We don't have a net. We're just putting one foot in front of the other. We need the tools that enable us to keep going in confidence and in hope and with courage and without fear. We need to be able to walk this narrow bridge every day of our lives, moving forward without the fear that can so paralyze us. Okay, we each have an answer to that. We each find our own set of principles to do that. That's one thing we do here at One World. We come together, we share spiritual principles, we share practices, we support each other, and that's one of the wonderful benefits of a spiritual community like ours. Today I want to take a bit of a different approach. I want to talk about philosophy. Okay, this is good. Nobody has got nothing left. You all get an A. Okay. Let's consider the notion that philosophy gets a bad rap. We think of it as a discipline that is kind of quaint. How many people immediately thought of bow ties? Okay, that's what we think of when we think of philosophy. A holdover from times past that really doesn't fit for our technological, fast-moving, modern 21st century world. Let me give you an example of how we sometimes think about it. Okay, so let's pretend your best friend came to you and said that her daughter was going into pre-med and was going to be a brain surgeon. You'd be like, wow, that's wonderful. Congratulations, what a great accomplishment. Let's pretend, flip it around, that your friend comes to you and says that her daughter is going to go major in philosophy. It's like, oh my God. You say that's just wonderful, and then you imagine her with a life of making lattes. Right? We don't think of that. It's like, who would do that? But let's not sell it short. Think of it in the same way, just for today, that we think of spirituality. How enriched have our lives been by our study of our spiritual principles? Just imagine removing it from your life. How empty it would be. You'd have a lack of direction. If you're like me, you'd feel kind of aimless. Think of philosophy the same way. The Greek Stoics, who are the folks I'm going to talk about today, had the same investment in the study and practice of philosophy. The same firm belief that this discipline would ground them and transform their lives. As a matter of fact, they regarded the study and the daily practice, see, I can't have a talk without getting that word daily in here, daily practice of philosophy as absolutely essential to living a life of happiness, or what they called eudaimonia. As a matter of fact, they thought it was so important that they urged us to put everything else second. Because what is more important than living a life of tranquility and peace? What is more important than how we live our lives? It requires us to think about it. Seneca once said, "A man does not become wise by chance." You don't just wake up and become wise. We work at it, we study at it, we practice it, and that's what the Stoics taught us. So, major Stoic philosophers included Seneca, Marcus Aurelius, the emperor, Cato the Younger, Zeno, who started the school back in 350 BCE, and Epictetus. So they range from emperors, Marcus Aurelius, to folks who were born as slaves, Epictetus. We don't even know his name. The word Epictetus means acquired. This guy is a major philosopher, a huge influence on Western culture, and we don't even know his name. That is the power of this philosophy. It's undergoing somewhat of a renaissance now, and why? Because I've heard it posited that when our world is spinning out of control, when we look around and we think we just don't even know what's going on anymore, Stoicism gives us back the control and reminds us that we never lost it. It gives us back a sense that we can control, if not everything, at least ourselves. It is practical, it is comprehensive, and its benefits are immediate. So the Stoics were a supremely pragmatic group. They believed that the goal of any philosophy is to enable us to live a happy life. How true is that? It's not to wind you into a pretzel. Indeed, if your philosophy does not result in a happy and meaningful life, they told you to bag it. They probably said that in Greek. They told you to just forget it and find another one. Any useful philosophy must fit our nature as rational beings, or it is no good. Okay, I use that R word, rational. That's a great word. Rationality, reason, also sometimes gets a bad rap in spiritual circles, because I like to say I'm so spiritual. My consciousness is so big I can't even walk through the door with it. I don't think about rationality because I'm so spiritual. That is a false dichotomy, and I urge us not to do it. We would be adrift without our rational ability. It's our reason. Think about it. See, there you go. It's our reason that helps us organize our emotions and our experience. It's our reason that persuades us of the utility of peace over conflict, love over hate, virtue over venality. Our rational ability and our hearts have to inform and balance each other. I think that's probably the definition of a balanced life. We need both. The Stoics believed that nature gave us the ability to reason, and our lives improve when we train it and we use it well. Sounds simple, but it is a lifelong task. We do not become wise by chance. Okay, so what is this philosophy? What does it do for us? And why do we care? Okay, so first let's talk about what it's not. I was preparing this talk and I was down in my office and I had a book on Stoicism, and the guy I share space with came in and said, Stoicism. And then he started making stuff up about what it was. It's like, so you fall down and you don't cry. I'm like, not really. You cut yourself and you're like, it's nothing. I'm like, no. But that's what we think. We think of Mr. Spock. We think of emotionless automatons, don't we? Stuff happens and we just keep motoring on. Well, Gene Roddenberry sort of had Stoicism in mind when he developed Mr. Spock, but in a sense, he had it a bit wrong. Stoics have emotions and show them. They are thoroughly engaged in all aspects of life. However, they study and they practice principles that prevent their emotions from running their lives. That is the key. That is essential. Instead, they cultivate awareness, clarity of mind, and mental tranquility, even in the midst of chaos. Their precept is, and this is, I love this, I say this to myself 20 times a day, the winds may howl, but I will not be swept away. Next time something happens to you, just say that. The winds may howl, but I will not be swept away. I can stand firm. So the first lesson Stoicism teaches us, which I've talked about and others have talked about from up here, and which we know well, but it never hurts to be reminded, is to put our effort, our focus, and our energy on those things we can control, and as Epictetus teaches us, forget the rest. Put our energy on those things we can control and don't even worry about the rest. As he put it, we must make the best of those things that are in our power and take the rest as nature gives us. So the analogy he gives is of a ship's journey. So he chooses to set out on a journey. What can he choose? He can choose the ship and make sure it doesn't have a big hole in it, it's seaworthy. He can choose the pilot and make sure that he's well trained, experienced, and not completely inebriated. He could select the most auspicious time to travel, given the winds and the traffic and the tide and whatever else is going on. That's it. He then sets out on his journey, and whether or not he makes it to the other shore depends on a whole lot of things over which he has no control. There may be a storm. He may be knocked overboard. The pilot may get sick. The pilot may get knocked overboard. Well, this was pilots back then. This is Epictetus we're talking about. Okay, now it would be the captain. Okay, thank you. Okay. Well, you know they have captains and pilots. Oh no, pilot is a river pilot. Think of Mark Twain. Pilot.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Okay. The winds may not blow. Why spend energy on eventualities you cannot affect? You've done all you can. Put your energy where it's going to make a difference, and don't waste time focusing on stuff you can't control. Give it no energy. Okay, how many of us have succeeded in doing that today? I don't see any hands. It's so easy to say, but it's so tough to do. Every day, including up to this moment as I stand here at 11:40, gives me examples of how I have not done it. Think about yourself. As you got here today, how many things have you worried about that you cannot even possibly begin to affect? People are laughing. Lots. Has it improved your life? No. Has it given you peace? No. Has it changed that eventuality? No. So how do we train ourselves to live with this uncertainty and stop giving it so much energy? Not by chance. So this brings me to the second principle I want to talk about. The first principle is what we can control. The second principle is a Stoic answer, which is brilliant and highly practical. We suffer when we worry that tragedy may strike. This may happen, that may happen. Oh my God, oh my God. The Stoics respond, yes it may. That is life. Yes it will. So how do we live knowing that our good fortune may be gone in a second? Okay, you may think these guys were kind of grim, but they were not. I would not know if they were party animals, but they had an outlook on life that gave them joy because they saw it for what it was. Back to the first point I made, the world is a narrow bridge. Isn't it better to know it? We know it is. We know our good fortune can change at any time. Wham! But we so fervently hope that it won't. What do we think of? I'm not going to ask for a show of hands on this, but what do we think of when we hear of another's illness? We search for reasons it might have happened, ways it might have been avoided. Are they former smokers? Did they get enough exercise? Oh, they decided not to have that test? How could that have happened? What are we saying? What we're saying is that maybe if we do everything right, that similar misfortune will not befall us. If I do everything right, I won't get that diagnosis. I will dodge that bullet. Kate Bowler, I've talked about her before, but I just so admire this lady. She's an assistant professor of the history of Christianity at the Duke University Divinity School. She's a historian. She's a wonderfully entertaining writer. She's a historian of what is known as the prosperity gospel and is the author of a book entitled Blessed, A History of the American Prosperity Gospel. At the age of 35, she was diagnosed with an extremely rare form of cancer, which, when it was diagnosed, was at stage 4. She had an infant son at home, a loving husband, a book deal, and unlimited plans. She was 35 years old. After her diagnosis, she wrote an article for the New York Times captioned Death, the Prosperity Gospel and Me, that details her journey. She got that diagnosis right after her book entitled Blessed came out. That is walking the narrow bridge. She wrote that she watched her friends try to impose an order and a logic on the situation that was just not there. They kept trying to make sense out of it, find a reason for it that gave humans some control. She writes, one of the most endearing and saddest things about being sick is watching people's attempts to make sense out of your problem. She describes a neighbor coming to her home, knocking on the door to tell her husband that that everything happens for a reason. Okay? I'd love to hear it, her husband says. The startled woman goes, what? Her husband says, I would love to hear the reason my wife is dying. Kate Bowler didn't have one. She couldn't think of a good reason. What she writes is that as far as she can tell, bodies are delicate and prone to error. They are. Sometimes stuff just happens. Life is delicate and prone to error. We may not find ourselves facing such a diagnosis, but we're all going to experience loss and difficulty as sure as we are sitting here. If there's anything we know that. But we can be prepared so that we are not swept away, no matter how the winds are howling. Stoics urge us to face the possibilities head on. This can be counterintuitive, especially sometimes in New Thought communities, because we're taught that if we think these negative things, we're going to attract them to us. That's not how it works. Stoics said, just face them head on in a practice that they called premeditatio malorum, or meditating on evil and troubles. This is another reason I love this stuff. It's because lawyers love Latin. Okay, there's one more bit of Latin. I have to inflict it on you too. I've been doing this for 30 years.
Like 30 years in high school.
I know.
12 years.
So, one more bit of Latin. In this practice they call premeditatio malorum, or meditating on evil and troubles, they consider those outcomes they fear. Calmly and intentionally. They don't put a lot of emotion behind it. They don't put a lot of fear behind it. They just entertain the possibility that it might happen. If one occurs, they are not taken by surprise. Seneca wrote, what is quite unlooked for is more crushing in its effect, and unexpectedness adds to the weight of a disaster. This is a reason for ensuring that nothing ever takes us by surprise. We should project our thoughts ahead of us at every turn and have in mind every possible eventuality instead of only the usual course of events. This is what he continued. Rehearse them in your mind. Exile, torture, war, shipwreck, all the terms of our human lot should be before our eyes. Okay, so we might not undergo exile, war, torture, and shipwreck, but we can undergo possibly illness, loss of a job, loss of a relationship, all those things we know to be true in our lives. When we do that, when we have sat with what might actually happen, we realize that it's a series of events we can survive. We realize that we can overcome it and get through it. If it happens, it's not a surprise, and we are more ready. If it doesn't happen, what do we have? We have gratitude that it didn't happen. It lets us look at our lives so much more sharply. We are grateful that it didn't happen. Everything turned out well. The ship made it. The crop didn't fail. Our child recovered from her illness. Thank you. I am so grateful. We are grateful for every moment because we know that this could be our last day. So this practice does not conflict with my earlier advice not to worry about events outside your control. Meditating on troubles that might happen is not the same as fearing them. It's not the same as investing them with energy. It's just realizing that they might happen rationally, looking at them, and moving forward anyway. Knowing that life is wonderful, life is fragile, and that it might be gone like that. So what tools do we have so far? We release those outcomes that are beyond our control, and we consider troubles that might occur so that we're not caught short if they do. Okay, the last principle I want to talk about is one that is most energizing and the one that gives us the greatest opportunity for growth. This is where we learn to thrive. It's called amor fati, or love of fate. Love of fate. Not acceptance of fate, it's love of fate. It's running headlong into it going, yes, give me more, this is wonderful, I am growing. The Stoics believe that the events coming at us are our greatest teachers. Adversity shows us what we can accomplish and what we can survive, no matter how those winds are howling. The energy of the obstacle can be translated into growth. Marcus Aurelius, who's the author of the Meditations, another book I highly recommend, put it this way: the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. What is the way Stoics put it? They say the obstacle is the way. It's not just we put up with stuff that happens, we welcome it. Why? Because it's like going to the gym and lifting weights. It flexes our muscles, it grows our muscles, it calls us to search within ourselves for that resilience, wisdom, patience, and courage that we would not otherwise find. What is a sad life? A sad life is one in which we are not tested. We never know the depths, the courage, the growth of which we are capable. We learn we have the ability to overcome even the most difficult circumstances. Stoics believe that we should welcome these opportunities. Love of fate. So what is the path to such growth in this circumstance? It is choice. It is realizing that we have the choice how we are going to respond to our circumstances. How powerful is that we are not victims? We have the choice to take that away. I remember this point is so profoundly illustrated in one of my favorite books, Man's Search for Meaning by Dr. Viktor Frankl. I've talked about it before. Are you all familiar with that book? I so recommend it. It's a wonderful book. Dr. Frankl was profoundly influenced by Stoic philosophy. It's the basis of his psychological theory of logotherapy. So you'll remember that Dr. Frankl was an Austrian neurologist and a psychiatrist who, along with his wife, was taken prisoner by the Nazis in 1942, and in October of 1944 was sent to the Auschwitz death camp. He was later transferred to Dachau. His wife was sent to Bergen-Belsen, where she died. His book, Man's Search for Meaning, is a reflection of the lessons he learned in and surviving the death camps. When we talk about adverse circumstances, when we talk about adversity, there can be nothing like that. The people in those camps faced death and trauma at every moment. They could be killed in a moment. Somebody they loved could be killed in a moment. And if they remained alive, they endured unendurable suffering. Dr. Frankl wrote of the spiritual freedom he found in those circumstances, of which he was not aware before. The freedom present in regard to one's reaction to any given set of circumstances. He remembered those in the camps who comforted others, who gave away their last scraps of bread, who were with others, who put others first. He wrote, "They may have been few in number, but they offer sufficient proof that everything can be taken from a man but one thing. The last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. Always we have that choice." He realized after much suffering that even in those terrible circumstances, we all have a choice about how we're going to respond. He taught us, and this is another wonderful image, there is a space between the event and our response. There is a space between the stimulus and our response. And in that space, we show who we are. In that space, we exercise our choice. And we show who we are. As Seneca put it, a wise man dyes events with his own color. Whatever happens, we can dye that event with our own color. So, here we sit in One World Spiritual Center, and I've been spending a whole lot of time talking about Greek philosophy. I don't think I've mentioned God once. What is that about? I do it because we awaken to that divine spark in us through the path of our own humanity, by embracing life, by embracing each other, by becoming fully who we are here to be. And these tools help us do that by seeing clearly what life is, by clearly exercising our choices, by choosing to live and affect others and show up in the world with courage and with integrity. That's how we best shine as the sparks of divinity that we are. Any set of principles that can help us develop the potential we have to grow, to serve, to love, to shine, I'm going to talk about them from up here, whether they specifically talk about God or not. You can be a Stoic if you believe in God. You can be a Stoic if you don't. They had a view of divinity more of as Einstein's God or Spinoza's God. Nature. Nature is that generative, creative force. That is God. But you don't have to believe in that in order to practice these principles. You can believe in other things. There's a guy named Tim Ferriss who wrote Tribe of Mentors. He speaks to the benefit to him of combining Stoic principles with Buddhist practices of metta meditation and mindfulness. They teach him compassion and empathy. And when he puts those together, it compels him further down his spiritual journey. That's a topic for another day, how these principles work with other spiritual practices. But the vista for applying them is huge. The question is, how do they improve your life? I believe that they can. They can help us become wise. They can help us become happy. They can help us live meaningful and productive lives. Seneca once wrote the following about his philosophy. No school has more goodness and gentleness. None has more love for human beings, nor more attention to the common good. The goal which it assigns to us is to be useful, to help others, and to take care, not only of ourselves, but of everyone in general, and of each one in particular. Let's use these tools to advance our own journeys, to advance our communities and our world. Let's not waste the day. Let's take these thoughts into meditation.